Welcome into the Harvest, friends. We are here to bring you the confidence and clarity you need to be a disciple and make disciples in the everyday places of life. I'm Abigail Wilson.
I'm Andrew Stroud.
And I am Lakeith Jones.
The gang's all here, friends, and we are bringing you a special podcast today. We're naming it, What Will the Pandemic Change the Church? How will? I can't talk. It's fine. We'll go from here. How will the pandemic change the church? So in case you didn't know, the three of us have prophetic insights. We're going to tell you exactly what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, and when it's going to happen. So this is going to be the best episode ever. I'm just kidding. We are, however, going to just talk about the church as a whole, where we've seen it in the last, decade or so, what the stats show us. And then we're going to kind of take you into what we feel like Into the Harvest has to offer as we came into this pre-pandemic time frame. And then maybe how things are going to shift and what we can offer to the future church. So I think it's going to be a really great discussion. Guys, should we get started?
Yeah, let's dive in.
Let's jump in. I think this is going to be so much to cover. We will forget about small talk. You can find out about us on social media, friends. Okay, so let's get into kind of where we have been as a church. Let's kind of lay the groundwork in conversation. I have just started calling this PC, pre-corona. I just discussed that, PC, we did things differently, and now here we are. So let's do a little PC discussion. Where did we kind of see the church in the last decade, and what did it look like? What was the health of the church? Andrew, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, this is, as we were talking about this particular conversation that we wanted to have on the podcast, I think it's going to be fun because all of us are sort of, I think we're creative thinkers. We're definitely sort of look ahead type people, type thinkers. And that's really what we're going to do today. We of course don't know how the pandemic is going to change the church, but it'll be fun to speculate a little bit and just try to project where we might expect things to go. But like you said, Abigail, it'd be great to kind of reset and start with, well, where is the church right now? And even maybe look back to what was the trajectory that the church, at least in America, was already on, which is part of why we started Into the Harvest several years back, is because we see the Lord already doing some pretty significant things in shifting the way that we understand and live out our call to be the church and to make disciples. And this can really be traced back, I think, to the late 1990s, the early 2000s. It's been said that the church of today in America is on life support, that it's really living on the energy and the culture that was created in decades past and even in centuries past, that there's not as much current relevance in the church in America, or that the church is losing relevance to the larger society. And I think that's true. George Barna wrote a book in the early 2000s, maybe the mid 2000s, called Revolution, where he predicted that the church would continue, the traditional church in America would continue to lose ground. And I would say between 2005 and today, we've seen that play out. I'm going to reference another study that was published in 2015 by a sociologist by the name of Josh Packard. And his study was titled The Exodus of the Religious Dones, DONES. And one thing that Josh Packard mentioned in that study, he had surveyed thousands of folks who were no longer involved in the church. What he found was that 31% of American adults, this was in 2015, 31% at one time were regular church attenders, but have opted out of the church as it is currently lived out in America. 31% of 300 million people is a lot of people. So, you're talking close to 100,000 folks. And these aren't people who never had an involvement with church. These are people who once were regular attenders to a church service and have decided that it's not worth their time. It's not a part of the life that they want to live going forward. Now, half of that number still consider themselves Christians. And so you've got, 30 to 40 million people who still identify as believers, but are not involved in any kind of church community, or certainly not church attendance. And at that time in 2015, there were another 7 million who were almost dones, who were sort of hanging on by a thread, but thinking seriously about opting out of church as it is traditionally practiced. So there's I would say there's a trend that we've seen happening over the past 20 years where the church is, you could say, losing its relevance with our larger society. And I would just say that the pandemic, I would expect to only accelerate that, but that would be one of the speculations. So let me just throw it back to you guys. What have you guys seen in terms of trends within the traditional church in America over the past 15, 20 years?
Yeah, I think I was second your sentiment, Andrew, about just the church hanging on by a thread. I think that the divorce rate for church is huge. Like, so many people have been hurt or been disappointed by a leader or a congregation that they're just done with church. I don't think that's fair. Like, I don't think that's the way it should be, but that's just reality. Like, usually when people are done with fellowship, their next step is to be distant from God. It's just natural when you don't have the pact. Yeah, I agree with that. I see a decline for sure. Whether it's fair or not, I definitely see it. How about you, Abby?
Yeah, this is such a a weighted question. I feel like there's so much, there's so much to talk about, honestly. I feel like what I see is a lot of churches really scared in regards to their finances. A lot of really big buildings not being full, and just literally dying as the generations get older and pass away. So the new generation is not participating in church the way my parents and my grandparents did, for sure. My generation has a totally different relationship with church in whatever form. And so I see a lot of that. I think the interesting thing is that here in San Antonio, while we are very much involved in the house church movement, we still have a lot of connections with the traditional church, because we do a lot of trainings in traditional churches. And so it's been really interesting to see the different worries and concerns of our local pastors. And a lot of them are fine, and that's really interesting. We'll talk about that a little later. Others are not, and the ones that aren't are the ones that are, have a really strong head pastor, like Mr. Man at the top of the little peak. And he is like leading hard, and he is holding on strong to his leadership, and probably has a lot of real giftings and talents in that area. But this and by the way, this is all post what we're in now, right now. It's just going to perpetuate even more. They have found that there's no way to really hold on hard enough. Like, there's not enough people. There's not enough staff. They just keep having to add staff because there's no one volunteering. And so you have to pay all the staff. And then they have a hard time finding anyone else unpaid to do anything. So these are like the struggles that the American modern church, an unhealthy one, is finding themselves in. And that's really hard to see. So we did that for 20 odd years, maybe even longer. This is just what our little group has kind of looked at. And then, lo and behold, a little virus came along and kind of added fuel to the fire, don't you think? Like,
Yeah,
in some ways, what happened was what may have just kind of been like struggling along, and like we, gosh, I used to have in my mind the statistics of how many churches close their doors every year, but it was a staggeringly high
I've got it.
number.
Yeah,
Oh,
I've
Andrew's
got
got
it.
it.
Yeah, so this last fall of 2019, there was a think tank that took place in over at Wheaton College, and it was sponsored by the Send Institute. But this was, they had over 50 church leaders in attendance, and it was specifically about church planting and missions in North America. So, people, big name folks, big name denominations were part of this. Guys like Tim Keller, for instance. And some of the stats that they looked at was that on the one hand, you could be encouraged because on average there are 4,000 new churches started every year. However, there are 3,700 churches that close their doors every year. So you have a net gain of 300 churches per year, which doesn't come close to keeping up with the population growth in the U.S. today. And so that's just new churches. That's not counting the exodus of the Duns that Josh Packard talked about. So those churches there's two things happening. Like we're losing, a lot of the churches are closing up the buildings, the institutions, and then even those that are still open are losing people across the board. And one of the statements that came out of this think tank last year was this. So this is not my statement. This is a statement that came out of these 50 church leaders. They said the pastor-led, program-centric, building-based church that is so predominant in the U.S. today is the church that is positioned to die. And so their takeaway after spending time together is that something has to change. The way we have been doing business. Another analogy that they used is that we're building Blockbuster video stores in 2019 and no one is coming, which I think is another great picture, that it's just the wrong approach, the wrong model to reach the society and the culture that we're a part of. So I think you're right, Abby. I think that was already happening. Now, again, this was fall of last year. This, like you said, this is PC, pre-pandemic. And so now you have, of course, even people that were hardcore supporters of the traditional model of church in America have been forced to at least take a pause on their normal rhythm of weekly gathering for that, pastor-centric, building-based, program-driven model. And it'll be interesting to see, well, what kind of impact does that have going forward?
Yeah. Well, I think this transitions really well into kind of our next little topic to discuss, which is kind of what we here at Into the Harvest have really been setting up to teach and to encourage in and to kind of point to for the last 2 years. I had a friend recently say, gosh, I feel like God told us a secret. And I thought that was a really great point. She was specifically referring to Zoom and like how Zoom can really be used to teach people and to have meetings, to do Bible studies. And she and her husband had been doing those for about a couple of years. And we in our ministry use Zoom all the time, so we did kind of feel like we're in on the secret, like we already knew how to use it.
Right.
But I think on a much bigger scale, I feel like God has let us in on a little secret, that he had already kind of been pointing to certain things in his scriptures to us as a group, that we were just seeing how we needed to make some changes. And so we had a couple of things that we felt like as Into the Harvest, we wanted to really focus on. So we're just going to go ahead and go through those again, because I think they're even more relevant now in a post-pandemic also a PC in world that we're going to be entering into. So we're going to go into those now, starting with we really want to use Jesus as our blueprint for everything that we do. So let's kind of unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, we're going to quickly talk about, three pillars that drive our distinctive. And like you said, Abigail, this is part of what we're trying to promote and teach, but it's also, these are guidelines for the way that we live, the way that we're trying to be the church and make disciples in our local areas as well. And so we think of Jesus as the blueprint for life and ministry, which I think very few people would disagree with. But I don't think it's actually practiced. I don't think most people are trying to pattern their daily lives after the life of Jesus, or that most ministries are trying to recalibrate everything that they're doing based on what they see from the life and ministry of Jesus. And that's something that we believe you can't improve on, that you're not going to get better than looking at Jesus and trying to follow his pattern. I heard a quote recently that I really like. It's basically, I'm going to butcher it, but every yes to one thing is 1,000 no's to other things. And so I think we try to say yes to Jesus as our blueprint for life and ministry, but then we also say yes to a church that seems to be really growing. And so we're going to try to practice what we see them doing plus what we see in the life of Jesus. And what we don't realize is that every yes is 1,000 no's, and you just can't do it all. Like you really need to look to Jesus and then focus on him and follow him for life and ministry. So that's the first one. That's the first pillar that we're trying to live our lives after, and we're trying to promote. A second pillar is that we believe that the everyday places are preferable, are superior to the sacred spaces. Everyday places are superior to the sacred spaces when it comes to being the church and making disciples. So we are purposely trying to shift away from sacred spaces. They don't have a place for us in how we're trying to be the church and make disciples. And we think that that's actually an advantage. So Keith, why don't you share with us a little bit about how that's looked for us here locally, or why we feel that way?
Yeah, I think I love what you guys have been sharing so far, and I love our intro that Abby also gives often about we want to bring you the confidence and clarity you need to follow Jesus in the 21st century. So we are not a pessimistic podcast. We do want to encourage you and help you seek Jesus during this time. So I think one big truth that stands out to me is that God doesn't drop the ball. He's not aware of what's going on and what has been going on for a long time, because it can seem a little defeating when you're like, man, what are we going to do? Like, the church is on a steady decline. Like, how are we going to bounce back? Like, what's the next step? But I really do think that God is using time like this to call pioneers and to call men and women of faith to really lead a new charge and lead in a different way. So the last time the church faced E word, it was persecution back in the book of Acts. And I love what Abby was saying about, like, this had been going on for a long time. Like, this wasn't just something that sparked on us. Like, the church had been going this direction for a while. The pandemic just kind of brought that all to light. So in the book of Acts, they were struggling as an early church, and there was this big wave of persecution. And I'll read a verse from chapter 8. It says, a great wave of persecution began that day, sweeping over the church in Jerusalem, and all the believers, except the apostles, scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria. So as a result of this horrible, terrible persecution, people were sent out. And it wasn't just the guys who were in high places, the official guys. It was laymen and women. So I'm hoping that, as a result of everything going on, that people would step forward and really lead in their corner of the harvest. So,
I was talking to a friend in Italy, but I think that they're just a couple of weeks ahead of us in a lot of ways. And she was saying, our church is struggling because we've basically been told that within 2020 and maybe 2021, we can't have more than 50 people in a room. And she said, and we just don't know what to do. And I really bit my tongue, and I was like, I didn't want to say anything, but what I wanted to say, and she knew because she's like my best friend. I wanted to say, like, I know exactly what you should do. And I'm excited. I think it's so great when God really just explodes his church. Like you were saying, Keith, that's what he did in those first few chapters of Acts. He took his people who were gathered together, and that was good and right. And he knew it was time. And so he lit that match, and out they went. And they hit the road, and they moved, and the gospel spread with them. And I think what we have today is a lot of people sitting in pews waiting to be served by their staff. And now we will literally not be able to do that anymore. And that's super exciting. So if you're listening to this and you're like, what are we going to do? The church will never be the same. Just praise God for that. Like, be excited because he has a plan for you, and what he has already been teaching you and preparing you for. This is it, friends. It's about to get real good.
Hey friends, thanks for watching the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to say, if you're someone who's looking for insights, ideas, and inspiration that will fuel your faith for the 21st century, then make sure you sign up for our weekly newsletter, Harvest Highlights. It's free, and it's loaded with resources that will help you be a disciple and make disciples in the everyday places. So make sure you check it out. There's a link in the description of this video. Back to the show.
So I think we had one last thing that we kind of, as Into the Harvest, really want to highlight and focus on. And if we're doing our job right, then we'll bring it to you. But, you know, we want our mission to fit the culture that we're in. We don't want to be a Blockbuster in the middle of streaming services. So we want to look around and see, you know, what is happening in our current culture. That's why already being equipped to do Zoom is so great, by being able to realize that people are on the internet. Like, here we are on YouTube, because guess what? That's where the people are. So we want to be aware. We don't want to be the world, but we want to be aware of the world and what the world is doing. And we can absolutely be a part of it and in it, and understand popular culture, and speak biblical truth that has always been the same into that. You want to add anything to that, Andrew?
No, I like that a lot. And that's like you said, the third pillar is, you know, the way we engage with the world and the way that we go about living the mission of Jesus. We want it to be relevant to the culture and the age that we find ourselves in. And it's something that we actually talked about on a recent podcast, that tradition often breeds complacency. And it's just kind of the nature of the beast. And so as long as we do business as usual, which is, you know, it's a temptation for us as the church, that we've always done it this way, this is the best way, you know, we're not going to make the adjustments that we need to make, because culture is moving, like culture is fluid. And so if we want to stay relevant to the culture, which we do, because we're called to be lights within the culture, then we need to be shifting and engaging in a way that makes sense. And the other thing that's changing rapidly is, because of technology, the age that we live in looks so different than it did even 20 years ago, that if we're not willing to take advantage of the advances that we see in the world around us in terms of technology, then other people are going to be there. It just won't be the people of Jesus, and that's unacceptable to us. So yeah, those are the three pillars. So I don't know if you, Abby, you think we should kind of shift into looking ahead. So how do we see the pandemic affecting?
Yeah, maybe we can just kind of practically talk about that too. I think those of you listening are probably tracking. You've been listening to us for a while probably. And so you're probably just ready. Like, I think most of us feel very ready to just get started, get our feet on the ground, so to speak, and get working. So kind of how we see things progressing. What can we do as believers who already kind of feel like we have a beat on what's going on? Where do we see things heading from here, and how can we help facilitate that, I think? So yeah, why don't we just get into that? Who wants to go first?
I can go, Abby. But,
Okay.
yeah, I was thinking, just like on that last topic, I'll kind of keep going with that. My last thought about the church being persecuted and kind of moving out. And I think, yeah, what we can look forward to was there was a wave of individuals that rose up after that weren't necessarily talked about before the persecution happened, but afterwards went on to do some really great things. So, a few names, if you're digging in that Bible daily, you'll probably be familiar with some of them for sure. But Philip and the Egyptian eunuch, Cornelius and his whole household, Barnabas, Lydia, for his ladies out there, Lydia was definitely one of those individuals, Silas, Titus, Timothy, and of course, Paul. But those individuals really didn't come around until after this big wave of persecution had came. So you can think about it in our modern sense that we have this thing going on, and there's almost going to be, like Abby was saying, a time where we can't focus on the masses. Like you're not going to have a certain amount of group people to focus on. You can focus on a few individuals, you know. And if Jesus really is our blueprint, you see this in this life and in this ministry. So I would like to encourage you wherever you are that you can be a part of this. You don't have to wait until the right resources or until you feel ready, but God has already equipped most of you or put somebody in your path that is equipped that you can get trained from to be sent out. So you can join those list of individuals who really led the charge after the P word really took over. So yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot, Lakeith, and I think you're right. I love the reference to Acts 8 because it hopefully will parallel where we see the church going here in America for sure, and hopefully worldwide. Someone once said that the first megachurch was the first church. You know, the church in Jerusalem had 5,000 plus members at one point, but that was the church in the world until Acts 8. In Acts 8, of course, the Lord allows persecution to scatter the common believers, the everyday members of that church, and they went out proclaiming Jesus. And so I think two things happened. One is what I think you were referencing is that you don't just look to your all-stars. If you were in the church in Jerusalem those early years, of course it's natural to look to Peter, John, these guys who had been with Jesus. That was natural and appropriate. But if you read closely there in Acts 8, everyone was scattered except the apostles. So the all-stars basically stayed in Jerusalem, and it was the rookies who went out and began to share. And so that's one thing that I hope will happen. A second thing that I think will happen is we will have to learn how to reach individuals and our neighbors versus having events, outreach events that are geared towards bringing in large groups of people and then trying to reach them as a whole. Again, I think that's going to be a very positive thing, even though it will probably be somewhat painful for us as members of the church because we're going to have to learn a new way of doing things. But the end result, I think, is going to be very positive for the church in America.
Yeah, I agree. I think some other things we need to remember is that we talk about this persecution and we just kind of rush past it, but persecution means pain. It means people were being killed, they were being hauled off to jail, like bad stuff was going down. I think as a country, we're really entering into a real time of suffering. If we're not already there, then it's coming our way. Just the economy is in a really hard place, and the coronavirus has not subsided. We have not seen the end of it as of yet. So we are really in a trying and difficult time where people are suffering, whether it's because of those two things, or is it because they're alone and they're literally in their home and they're lonely, and maybe for the first time ever they realize they need community and they need other people, or their anxiety, depression levels are off the charts and they're looking for the answer, and we have it. We have Jesus, and people are really looking like they have not looked in a long time. So that's a really encouraging thing for us, but it's also a call to action. When we do have to go out and about. I was talking to a known evangelist in my life. Like, this dude shares the gospel with a tree if he sees it breathing. And he was telling me last week about, he had to go to the doctor. And so at the doctor's office, he shared with like 6 different people, including the doctor, and just really took it. He was like, there's been a virus in this world for a long time, and that virus is sin. And then he like just went hard after the gospel. Now, this is an evangelist, you guys, so I don't know if any of us here would probably be so bold, but maybe we should be, because the point is that God is priming our country for what could really be a huge movement of the Spirit. But like you guys said, it's going to be probably our neighbors who we have to reach. And we've been talking about this for a while, which is so cool, but we are now going to be forced to have to do it, because it's literally the people around us. It's the people in our neighborhoods, on our street. It's the friends that we already know. It's the people that God has already put into our lives, whose numbers are already in our phones. Those are the people that we have contact with right now. Those are the people we can text and check in on and see how they're doing, and make connection with. I think it was this last week, I met with a couple of ladies who are in my book club, and we all social distanced on picnic blankets. We were 6 feet apart in a park, and we had been there for about an hour, and this lady comes up and is like, I saw you from my house, and I just had to come over. Like, I want to be friends with you. You look like you're having so much fun. I mean, I know we're cool, but we're not that cool. And my point is that she was hurting. Like, she was missing people. Like, she came out of her house and she came over and she wanted to talk to us. So I think we're going to see more of this, you guys. We're going to see more of a need in our communities, and it's whether or not we're going to step up. Because it's really just down to us now. It's not, our pastor isn't here. Like, he's not here in this room. He wasn't there in that park with my 3 friends. So we have to really take what we have, our relationship with Jesus, and it's time to go at it. So it's exciting. I had one last verse, just in thinking about this podcast today. I was reminded of Isaiah 43:19, which says, behold, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. And if there was anything that I would describe the United States, PC, it would be a wilderness and a desert. So I'm pretty excited. That was, a specific prophecy, but I'm just going to go ahead and claim it for us now too, that, the Lord is doing a new thing. And so let's not try to get back what we had and cling to that thing.
Right.
We have a new thing. So it's exciting.
Yeah. Well, I know we're wrapping up here, but I just want to jump on that, Abigail. No, I like it. Isaiah 43. I think what's exciting is that the Lord is the one who's behind this. Not so much that I'll say he's using the pandemic for his purposes. That's the way I will say it. I do think that we can expect business as usual will not return when it comes to the church in America. I think that the traditional church, like you said, that this will be an accelerant, that the pandemic will actually accelerate the decline of attendance in the traditional model of church. There will be people who don't come back, either because they just realized that Sunday attendance didn't really improve their life. It wasn't really something that was adding value, and they've gotten by fine without it over the past couple of months, or because they just watch a service online, which I do think will also increase. A lot of big churches will go online and they'll stream their service. But I also think that the church will go small in a very healthy way, that even traditional churches will look for ways to break down their members into smaller gatherings where genuine relationships can happen. And then groups like ours, I think, will hopefully continue to reach folks who are unchurched or dechurched, because these 31% of adult Americans who are done with the traditional church, they're still out there. And many of them still have a faith in God or an interest in God. And that is a huge part of our mission field, is to reach the people who are around us. So I think our team would say we're actually very positive about the future of the church, even though it's going to look different. Keith, you got any last thoughts as we wrap up?
No, I think you guys crushed it. You guys covered it. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I think also, just a lot of optimism. Like, I think I'm excited for the future because, like, God had to force their hand in the book of Acts. Like, their initial mindset into it was it probably was hard to be like, man, God loves us. Like, why would he allow us to go through this pain? And why would he so much suffering? Like, God, what are you doing up there? But God had a bigger plan. So I think I'm optimistic about the future and how we're already kind of trying to do this, but I think this just confirms more so our conviction about being in the harvest and serving the Lord that way.
Yeah, absolutely. My oldest son asked me today, because we were kind of talking about these things and talking about church. I don't even know how it came up. Things come up when we're on our walks, but he was like, so wait, are you saying that God like sent the pandemic? And I was like, no, that's not what I'm saying. But I do believe God will use it, and he definitely is. And that brings me great comfort. I think anytime I can really perceive that God is not surprised, he never is. He always sees things coming. And so even when I'm surprised, when I'm thrown off, I can always have the confidence to know that he has been preparing us, that he has been working behind the scenes in ways that we will maybe only realize much later and look back. So I'm excited. And all of you listening, I hope you're encouraged by this. I hope you're encouraged by what God is doing and will do as we see things continue to unfold in this new PC time. So we hope that you enjoyed this. If you have any thoughts on what we talked about today, we would love to hear them. Any questions that have come up for you as you were listening, we would love to hear those. We have another Answer Your Questions podcast coming up in the nearest future. So if you would like to be on that, you should hurry up and give us your question. We want to answer it. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
All right, bye guys.